Good morning, beautiful people of the internet, and welcome back once more to our Sunday special live. Joined as always by Helen Chorley, who looks very comfortable and very yawny. Adam Lawrence, who's looking like he's just ready to tear into the Sunday supplement today. Piotr Rusinek, who's full of smiles and going on a hike this morning, which is absolutely insane. And me, Jay Howard, who has nothing relevant to say this early on in the morning. Adam, do you want to kick it off?
Fantastic. I think when Helen Chorley was very yawny, I thought we were going to have like some kind of rhyming prose or something. But I was just thinking, I'm not really sure what rhymes with Lawrence. So I was going to be really interested to see what he did. But
Torrent.
yeah, I'd take that. Yeah, torrent. So this week's supplement, it's been an interesting week, really, or interesting for complete economic nerds like me, anyway, because there's been quite a lot happen. Especially as we're kind of late on in the year, and I know people are starting to switch off, and probably just a mini rant on the subject of that to start with. I've always found this coming week one of the most lucrative weeks in the year in terms of doing deals, and I'm seeing things drop into place as I do every December that just aren't there for the rest of the year. There's stuff there at genuine 25 and 30% discounts out there on the market in the post-auction bits, and there'll be some auction scraps in the following week. I have no doubt about it. Always a week to be on it until what I affectionately heard called a few years ago for the first time Black Eye Friday, on the strength of the fact that it's the night of the year that everyone goes out and gets a black eye rather than Black Friday, which still makes me chuckle to this day. So the last Friday before Christmas. So I would say get a shift in this week, and don't deserve your black eye, but deserve any alcohol you might be imbibing on Black Eye Friday. So big week this week, in as much as, first of all, we had some unemployment data, and the news really was, we know that the population has grown, mostly thanks to net migration. No real changes in the percentages. The long-term sick problem is continuing. We've got nearly 500,000 more people on long-term sickness than we had at the end of 2019. So that's a massive, massive number. And it's still going to keep being problematic until the NHS waiting list situation is reversed. And of course, that also ties into the fact that we lost 131,000 work days in October this year due to industrial action that's still ongoing. And 60% of that was healthcare and social care. But the 49,000 people who were involved in that was the lowest number of people involved in industrial disputes since June of 2022. So that sort of puts that whole thing into context. We've had over 18 months now of strike action and all the rest of it. And if you've still been following it, I think you'll know rail workers haven't quite got there yet. And whilst the consultants have agreed a deal, the junior doctors still have not agreed a deal and are going into strike action in the new year. So I'm not blaming the doctors for any of that. I've been broadly supportive of them trying to reverse the trend of the last 13 years of letting inflation degrade their pay completely. They do a big, long degree and an incredibly difficult job that, let's face it, most of us would not be capable or have the appetite of doing. But I'm just talking about the economic consequences of that. And this is why the government should have to try and consider that when they're trying to hardball them quite so much. I think there is an ultimate cost to the country, especially as the doctors have held out for longer than anyone else, and they obviously feel like there's significant injustice here. There, the train drivers, I'm not going to comment on, but suffice to say, I don't quite feel the same way about the train drivers as I do about the healthcare workers, which is probably a fair mirror of the opinion of most of the people in the centre of the country. But there we go. So no changes in percentage terms. The bigger news was wage rises down quite a lot, so about 10% down from where they were. They were hanging around 8%. They're now 7.2 at last count, so still uncontrollably high. And you've still got in the mixer now what's been enshrined for next year, which for those who don't remember, 6.7% index-linked benefits rises, 8.5% pensions rises, 9.8% minimum wage rises. So significantly inflationary stuff. And the Sunak chat for this week to The Spectator, where he did an interview, was very much, we're putting ourselves in a position to be able to control welfare and spending next year, which is suggesting some pretty old school Tory style stuff before the next election. Although if you look at the Labour Party rhetoric at the moment, Rachel Reeves' chat is very much around working people. It's not around the benefit system. So Labour understand the scale of the task that faces them, and it's starting to get really interesting around the political analysis side of things. But Sunak's popularity slipped to -49, the joint lowest for any prime minister in a long, long time. Joint lowest, of course, with Boris, who was so popular and then so unpopular when everybody realised that, you know, he'd taken the mickey, really, to put it in a nice way during the whole COVID thing. So that's where Sunak's at, rightly or wrongly. I still feel there could be a bit of a feel-good factor around the time of April and the ensuing months when these wage rises kick in. It is possible. We'll see what happens, but it does look significantly odds on that Labour will be running the country in 2024. I'm betting September or October for the election, for those who haven't seen. So that was the big piece, which on its own, because of this, it's not so much about where wage rises are at the moment. It's the trend that informs the market, and the bond market's read that trend as, right, we can knock 0.25% off the bond yields, pretty much, on the strength that the logic being we'll be able to drop interest rates sooner than we expected because wage rises are coming down, or at least looking like they're trending downwards. We then had a day where GDP for October was announced. The expectation was 0%, and it was actually a 0.3% drop. So that's a rounding error of £7.5 billion. So not chicken feed. But again, the bond market saw that as a reason to drop the yields again, because ultimately, if the growth isn't there or it goes negative, the first response there has to be, assuming inflation is under control, and that's a big assumption, of course, but assuming inflation is under control, the first task is to drop the interest rate from the central bank. And by having the interest rate at a meaningful level, which we've now got, they've got that tool back in the locker, so they can do that. And the bond markets are betting 3 cuts next year. And then we had the Bank of England meeting, and I thought there might be a real reversal around this, because I was thinking, right, if I was on the committee, I'd be voting hold or cut rates, whereas September this year, I'd have voted to go to 5.5 personally. I thought it was tight between hold and cut. Probably would have voted hold, might have considered voting cut. But instead, the 3 people who voted to put rates up in October, and they didn't win because it was 6-3 in favour of holding, still voted to put rates up again, even in the face of this information. Now, this is maybe because they're better economists and better central bankers than I would ever be, and don't want to be performing any knee-jerk reactions. I think at least signalling that probably the rises are over might have been a good thing. So the bond yield shot back up again briefly, and then they came right back down again by the end of the week. So the moral of the story is we've dropped about 0.4% off the yields this week. It's very possible we might see some residential mortgage rates at under 4% in that competitive market. And that will be a real fillip, because that's not happened for 9 to 12 months or so. That will give the market a bit of hope in 2024. And whilst 3.99% might look high in the recent historical context, in the very recent historical context, it looks particularly affordable. And I think psychologically, people moaning at rates above 4%, if you can't handle a 4% interest rate, one might argue you shouldn't be borrowing any money in the first place. I think it's fair to say. So that's where the market's at, and that's the sort of moral of the story of this week. And then the other thing that I looked at in some detail, I mean, I did have to have a big shouty rant about, you've got to remember that if you're in a mortgage process at the moment, make sure your broker's checking for best rate for you before you go to offer. And even if you've already gone to offer and it's with the solicitors, still double check that you can't change product down, even if you have to pay a fee for the offer to be reissued. It's probably a 150 quid admin fee. I had absolute justice really this week with one loan with it's not the easiest building in the world, but it's also not the most difficult. It's fair security. The lender agreed it before we got into the process. We've done what we said. We've had it valued. They've messed about so much. It's slightly complicated because one company owns another company. So it's a junior senior structure, and there's a a lease being granted, and there's a few nuances in there, but nonetheless, we knew how to do it. We've done it with this lender before. We've used the same lawyers before. It's not a big deal. And they have what can only be described as messed around. But happily, they've messed around so much that in the interim, we've now had our third reduction in the rate that we're going to be paying on this loan. And we might get another one. We might just get another one next week before we get to offer. So great news on that front. So for once, the delay has made us a few quid, because it's not a small loan. So it's a pleasing amount of money every month, and that will mean a little bit of extra rolling into the bank account, which is ideal at this time, or in fact, at any time, let's face it. So I did a bit on the Zoopla research report. They do a rental report quarterly. Big fan of Richard Donnell, who's the exec director of research at Zoopla. Really sees the world in a very clear way, very data-based in what he does, very factual, very knowledgeable, very calm and collected. There's no particular clickbait in what he writes. I don't think he writes what Zoopla particularly wants to hear. He just writes it as he sees it, which is a methodology that is very close to my heart, apart from anything else. And he said, rents next year 5% up. That's where his prediction's at the moment. That's slightly misleading, because prediction for London 2% up. Prediction for the province is 5 to 8% up. And this is just based on the fact that affordability in London is squeezing and biting harder. And it does seem, and it's always been the case, this is why London is a Labour stronghold apart from anything else, right? It's always been the case, but it does seem it's even harder in this day, in this environment, to be on a lower wage in London. And a lot of the London wage premia just don't look like they're enough anymore for people. And you're already seeing, as you guys know, lots of overcrowding. Affordability is squeezed significantly, and provincial asset owners like myself will be pleased to see there's still lots of affordability. Richard also makes some reference to the fact that Scotland rents are the only ones that have gone up more in the last 12 months than the 12 months before that. And why do you think that is? Well, it's the rent cap. Of course it is. There's no two ways about it. It's getting ridiculous. And the idiots up in Scotland, or one specific idiot who I will name, Patrick Harvey, thinks that doubling down on tactics that blatantly aren't working is going to help. Whereas really, this is the worst thing you can do for the tenants. It's just so stupid. I'll also say, I must say, I listen to, I don't know if anybody else listens to The Rest is Politics with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. It's one of the most popular podcasts in the UK. I really enjoy it because they have some great banter on there. They're both smart guys that are worth listening to. But they have a sister pod called Leading, where they interview world leaders and people of significance. And this week they released one with Angela Rayner in, and I thought, I'm going to find this difficult to listen to, but I'm going to sit through it and see what happens. And apart from the occasional bit of shouting for the first 20 minutes, it was really good to actually get to know her and what she's about a bit more. And her real clear stated objective is that she wants council houses to be built. So that's her number one priority. Now, has it been costed? Is it feasible? All the rest of it. Is it workable? The actual numbers behind this stuff must be really quite complicated, because if you're going to, as a council, have to build a house and accept, let's say, a 3.5% yield on it, because you're talking about affordable rents and stuff like that. And I'm sure that's probably about the average that a council house will yield. And of course, you've still got costs of being a landlord, which will be more significant for a council than they might be for a lot of other organisations because of the compliance and all the rest of it. So that, on the face of it, doesn't sound like a great investment. And even the council at the moment can't go out and borrow money at less than 3.5%. But that's not the whole argument, because you've got to consider how much does it cost the council if people aren't housed? And that's where the council's obligations in terms of homelessness, for example, have to come into the equation. And there's variety of figures. Crisis did a pretty comprehensive piece of work in 2017, which suggested the cost of a homeless person was around about 23k a year. I've seen pieces of work that estimate the societal cost at more like 40 to 50 grand a year. And of course, if you become homeless, you're more likely to go to prison, for example, and that, or you're more likely to be on it requires significant NHS resources because of the damage that it does have costs of £50,000 a year and upwards to the state. So there is some kind of complicated economic melting pot of figures that need to be put in there. And I did think by the end of the conversation, not that she'll want to, but I'd be happy to talk to Angela Rayner on the basis of trying to make something workable and understand the big picture problem, and just talk a bit about how to engage with the PRS, not make them the enemy, because I do still fear there's an ideological bent there, although she did an excellent job of understanding the audience she was speaking to, which will be largely centrist. I mean, you've got a former Tory politician and a former Labour spin doctor / the guy who controlled Tony Blair, basically. So you've got a very centrist audience. And she did a good job of not making you want to panic or tear your hair out if Angela Rayner was elected. I'm not really talking about landlords. I'm talking about the wider general public. So I thought that was promising, and I thought it'd be worth saying, because I still think she's a bloody idiot for saying I'm going to get rid of Section 21 on the first day of being elected. I think that's just misunderstanding the impact that will have. And again, I come back to the impact on tenants, not the impact on everybody else. But other than that, yeah, it felt a lot better than it did before I listened to that interview. So lots of hope for 2024, I think.
So amazing that you can make update on financial market. Sounds like a match of the day update from Premier League. I think as you were talking about, number one, the December thing about auctions, that's a really good one, because this is like the best time for picking up things, like the most time sensitive period in the year where things just need to get done before Christmas. And if you can make it, there are deals to be done. But secondly, as you were talking about the council and how possibly not feasible it is for them to be building council housing. I mean, Guy just put a comment saying that councils potentially have land that they already hold and could be developed. And I was also thinking, because you said 3.5% yields, potentially that's what we need to be. But I did some quick calculations. Say if there was a 2-bedroom flat like needed to be built, and then the council lets it at the housing rate. So that would be about 1,200 a month, let's say, more or less. So that's 14k per annum, 14.5 almost. So a standard 2-bedroom flat is about 700 square feet, more or less. So basically that works out to £20.5 a square foot per year in terms of rent. And so if the cost of building that whole thing was 250, 300 per square foot with all in, then that's like a 6.5-7% yield, which is actually pretty decent. But obviously the biggest challenge for councils is actually building at that level. But developers don't.
And as long as you already own the land, of course, as Guy said, that's right. Yeah. If you're not costing in the land there as well, that obviously helps. Yeah,
that's right. And I think like normal developers don't have problems building at 250, 300 per square foot, or even 200. So if you were to build a block of flats and partner with private developers who can deliver things and then make say 20% profit on land that they don't own, they don't have the finance cost, or they only have to finance the build cost. So that would basically mean the council is winning, because they're delivering housing on land that they already own at costs that they wouldn't be able to do themselves. And then
I think they can probably squeeze the developer to 15% margin if they forward fund it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It definitely, I have seen on a mini project level, absolutely that be done and be achieved in forward funded council projects. It's definitely possible and ideal in the case of unused buildings and various brownfield schemes that can be done. But remember, Piotr, they're really serious about delivering 1.5 million homes over 5 years, or it won't even be 5 years, because the Parliament won't last for 5 years, because it never does. Now the Fixed Term Act's been repealed, apart from anything else, unless they bring that back in. So you're talking, they want that to be social and local authority led, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. those sorts of sites that will fit that criteria will be maybe 10 to 20% of them, and then others will require. I mean, they're more aggressive on dezoning or reclassification of some of the green belt, which actually is correct. It's not going to fit very nicely with the. I'll tell you who's going to feel politically homeless after the Labour Party get elected, if that's what happens, will be the Green lobby and the particularly significant lefties. Because another thing that Rayner did in this interview is she threw Corbyn right under the bus, and then she reversed over him a few times, and there was like an 18-point turn over the leather patches in his jacket. And that's something that I've seen this week in the wider media that hasn't really been publicised before. And it's a very clever bit of political spin, but they're basically telling us all now what we finally wanted to hear, which is Corbyn had no leadership skills, Corbyn couldn't make a decision, Corbyn was rubbish, but Rayner had a choice of either stay within the madhouse and try and influence that for change, and now Starmer's the answer and he's the second coming of Jesus Christ and all other stuff we don't believe, or do what a lot of the other front bench MPs for Labour parties did at the time, just walk out and leave it alone because he was just so rubbish. So I think that can go some way towards it, but I think you're right in terms of what you're getting towards. How much can be delivered at that level? And you know full well, as soon as public money is really dangled, remember, they suspect that 33% or more of local authorities in the UK are insolvent at this time. So I don't know how this plan gets past the Section 151 officer. And I'm not sure they've looked into the rules around administration and all the rest of it to start with. It's one thing saying blame the Tories for the government and now the local authorities are bankrupt. Okay, who's recapitalising them, from where, at what cost? And then you've got the problem of where's the expertise of, frankly, any of the people on this call could, with relative ease, understand and do the pricing like you've just done there in the calculations. And I think we'd be quite disappointed to realise how much of a dearth of that sort of level of knowledge there is inside the local authorities. So your problem will be, look at the US, when some of the states and some of the legislature they're in control of, and what a mess it is. And that's our local authority system. Our local authority system is just as much of a mess. So turning around and achieving this, even getting it kicked off in a meaningful way and financed without spooking the international bond markets again, within the first 6 months of an administration, will be really, 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 really difficult. Really difficult.
It's one of the things that got me thinking about this part of the conversation is if you look at your standard council tenant or the makeup of that, you have cheap cost of housing for people who are minimum wage earners and things like that, and council homes have been good for that in the past, but the majority of council tenants are people that are on housing benefit, social security, so they're actually getting the rent that they will be paying from the government. So calling it a yield would be rather redundant when basically you're funding your tenant to be in your property. And that's not taken into consideration, refugees and immigrants who will likely be put up in some of these properties because they need to be put somewhere, right?
I guess, Jay, it is you are right, it's comparatively redundant, but if you think that you're either paying it to a private sector landlord or you're paying it to yourself, I think in the past when we've done deals where we said we're actually renting that property at the moment, but we could own it, and even though we're paying the same amount of money out, instead of paying the landlord, we're paying a bank and leaving ourselves a bit of margin. So there is still the accounting equivalent of that yield, even if it is a bit of a false construct,
Yes, yeah. I mean, you wouldn't base an entire security bond off the back of the social rents you'll be getting from it, because it's a double accounting exercise. It's a fugazi. The money is just going back into the. That's all it is.
But the councils are not getting. The council would get money from the central government, and that's a different thing, because it's if the council builds the housing, it's owned by that council, not the government, and it's actually two different entities paying the money and getting the money, I think. But anyway, it's I think it's necessary to even have mathematically those figures there so that you can assess what's
I,
viable, what's not viable.
I would state that the most interesting part of this conversation is Adam's statement about, yeah, this sounds great. Could you get the private developers, on the public purse to build the stuff out? Yeah, you could. But if it was forward funded, as Adam said, very easily, I imagine. But then you would need, if you had a Labour government or a left centrist government in, you're going to upset your core lefties by having these private companies making a mint off the public purse, which is again another issue.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, if they are going to do it and fund it themselves, how are they going to do that? And like Adam said, where's that money coming from? How are they raising that upon what terms? And I think even if they had 5 years in office or 10 years in office, let's say people are completely revolted by the idea of another Conservative government in the next 20 years. Let's say it is Labour and Lib Dems, or Labour and Green, or Labour and whoever else they have to sell their souls to get a majority. I just don't see it happening. And then it's this stagnation that you're seeing everywhere. You have effective leadership and ineffective leadership. And at the moment, the politics in the UK, probably the last 10, 12 years, has been popularist. But the problem with populism is it is a wave that ebbs and flows in one direction over the other, depending on how the media spins certain stories to people, how easily manipulated the populace
it's not factually based. That's the biggest problem with it. And then people say, let's have Brexit. There's lots of good reasons why leaving the EU in theory would have been a good idea, but you could argue that it was never going to be implemented well. There was no route by which there was a proper Brexit. It just sounded like a bloody good idea that was never a good idea economically, certainly in the short term, and has been executed within the bottom half of the competency with which it could have been executed in the real world, and that, you're right. It's a massive problem. And the other problem, of course, which we've got, is you've got a big three house building, oligopoly, short membership oligopoly, who've made mega profits over the past decade, mostly thanks to Help to Buy, struggling on a little bit at the moment, but have managed. How have they controlled the price of new build housing this year, which has still moved upwards? How have they done that? Vastly restricted supply. So what's happened to SME developers at the lower end? It's got harder. They've done other things. I know lots of developers, as we all do, that they have to hold stock like commercial properties or whatever in order to make their business viable in the medium term, because it's so hard to find sites and deliver sites and get through planning. So unless there's a major lead planning reform, and to be fair, Labour are more likely to lead that planning reform because they're less worried about upsetting people in the home counties who just don't want any building anywhere near, which is traditionally the old Conservative heartland. So Labour can solve that problem, but in what length of time? 2 to 3 years, maybe? How will this lead to 1.5 million houses in a 5-year term? It's just not realistic. But, by crippling the SME developer, where are the people who are going to be able to deliver all of this? There aren't enough of them. There aren't enough contractors to be able to fulfill that level of demand. And they're starting from, the first 12 months of the administration, all they'll be doing is taking credit, is the wrong phrase, but they'll be taking credit for the figures of what's happened over the past 12 months. And we think we're only going to deliver about 110,000 units this year. So that'll be the first number that comes in, which leaves them with 1.39 million in 4 years. I mean, it's just not going to happen. We haven't got the people. We haven't got the land. We haven't got the planning. We haven't got the zoning. We haven't got the appetite. I'm not sure we've got the funding. And that's probably the one biggest blocker. Even if you sort out the other blockers, what are they going to do? Put pressure on the Bank of England to get the interest rates down? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, even if they were able to raise the funding on like a 100-year coupon or something like that, and it was based around, good quality. Do you look at council housing around the country? The stuff doesn't break. I'm not talking about the post-war nail it together kind of stuff. The solid stuff. It lasts forever. So if they can go out and say, this is what we're building, this will be a housing supply of 1-point-something million pound units, or 1.7 in terms of number of units, then I think they would be able to get, they'd be able to raise some good money off a 100-year, 80-year food ban on that.
I wonder,
Then comes the question that, you know, it won't be the council housing, it will be an investment that to an American fund or a Russian oligarch, or, you know, it will be someone who will be profiteering off of that. And for Labour, that's a very difficult pill for their hardcore followers to swallow.
You know what though, Jay? You say that, but remember they did get heavy, and it didn't go well, you know. But they got heavily involved in PFI at the time after 1997, and that's how Alan Clark funded the health service. Basically, they said, "Look, we're not going to spend any more than the Conservatives are saying that they're going to spend. We'll find the money from elsewhere," and that meant private investment. So the particularly, this is what I mean by, I think the particularly noisy, Twitterati, lefty, loony side of the debate will find themselves politically difficult to get on board with the Labour Party. But at the moment, the Conservatives have got more problems with Reform UK than the Labour Party have got from the further left of the Labour Party, because the Lib Dems don't inhabit that space. The Greens do, on the basis of kind of a pretend scenario where you can have green energy and you can still have good outcomes for poor people, which you absolutely can't, because it's so much more expensive to deliver all of the things that they want to deliver, and that has to be delivered through tax or debt. And either way, the poorer you are, the worse off you are, because of the way the tax system raises it. And you can point to tax the rich and blah blah blah, and no one can show an argument for taxing more than an extra, not even 10 billion quid from the rich, when you need 2 trillion to invest in a green. The numbers are just so far apart from each other. It just doesn't work in any shape or form. So Labour have got a time where they can enjoy the centre ground here, and meanwhile Sunak is distracted by the idiots on the far right who care more about, it doesn't matter if it's 250 grand a person to send people to Rwanda, because it'll put people off from coming into the UK on small boats, which is such a tiny, it's not even the immigration problem. It's not, I mean, and he's an idiot for he needs to step back and just say, I'm happy to annoy the far right of the party. Sack them. Don't care about them. Get on with it. I'll face up to them, and I'm going to fight in the centre ground where I'm going to be able to get votes from people who are otherwise going to vote Labour, like they did in mid-Berkshire in the most recent election, which you couldn't imagine a more leafy, lovely constituency that is, if you cut it through the middle, it would have had Tory, you know, on the stick of rock for the last 70 years, and still it's been turned, you know. But there you go.
I mean, the problems here are actually pretty huge, because when you see the news and the and party members talking about, you know, for Labour being the hard left, people in the party, and the Conservatives having hard right, what it sounds like is a squabbling team, right? And when you have a squabbling team, you can't lead that team, and that's what makes these people ineffective leaders. That's what's made probably the last 4 or 5 potentially unelected leaders very ineffective, because even if they weren't paying attention to the popularist vote and they thought, actually, this is why we're going this way, this stay the course, this will be the result that we get, blah 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 blah, but they don't do that. They all have this squabbling. The most interesting thing I saw recently was Keir Starmer basically letting the hard lefties walk themselves out of the room in a pseudo protest over something they have absolutely no control over, which was probably one of the more smart, if it was his intention, probably one of the more intelligent political moves I've seen for a very long time. But there is no way to be an effective leader with these conditions, because all you're doing is you're trying to appease party members rather than trying to run a country. Now, you may have some idealistic thoughts or feelings on how these things should be run and how these things look, but the reality is that it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're taking the steps required to improve the country.
I completely agree. I think he's been really really sharp with what he's done recently, and I think it's had a significant impact. And it gives you a bit of hope for as and when things do change. And it's just a classic. If you go back and look at parliaments that have gone beyond 2 terms, this is the sort of thing that happens all the time. It's a bit of a joke at the moment because there's so many CRGs and ERGs and ECGs and BCUs and goodness knows whatever else in the Conservative Party. It feels like a party of 20 different subgroups of people who are constantly infighting. And it's just the big definer of whether we get 10 years of Labour administration or not will be who's the next leader of the Conservative Party. Because there will be calls to trusts will be being wheeled out, and that is, if that doesn't frighten you after everything we've seen, Braverman will have a look and then she'll find out who her friends are and who her friends aren't, and goodness knows whoever else will be in the shaker. And that will define whether the Conservative Party can get re-elected in 2029 if they lose next year, because you'll have what's their gut feel going to be, lurch even more to the popularist type of things, which you could hear when Liz Truss, it wasn't just me who was saying this woman thinks echoing the monetary policy of the Bank of Japan is a good idea. Look at the 30-year record of the Bank of Japan. I did not influence the international bond markets. They took it upon themselves to say these people are idiots and the UK needs to pay a big price for debt if this is what's going to happen. I can't help but think, though, the one tactic that really does need to be employed here in a big way is significant cuts to the government spending budget, which doesn't have to mean public services necessarily in any shape or form. I think if it was America, it would be easy because you could just say, do you know what, we're halving the defense budget next year because we'll still be spending loads more than any other country in the world. Yeah. And I want to see 80% of the results for 50% of the money. That's what I want to see. Get on with it, right? Come back to me and tell me how we're going to achieve that. And we'll still be spending 6.5% of our government spending on defence. We don't have that luxury in the UK. I'm not really sure where we would and could make those cuts. I wouldn't be tempted with many of the tax cuts that Sunak's going to be talking about next year, because I think you're probably going to need to squeeze things a bit harder because these wage rises are going to be very inflationary. But, I realise I've been an inflation hawk for, 3 years now, pretty much. And I'm very willing to change my position, but it's the old, when the facts change, sir, I change my mind. What do you do? Well, the facts haven't bloody changed. Yeah, that's your problem. Yeah. So I put a bit in the supplement this week about transitory inflation, and you'll remember the BS rhetoric from 2021, which was like, oh, it's just a minor wobble. It's like, don't think 11.1% inflation classifies as a minor wobble, doesn't folks? And now the transitory people are back out saying, yeah, I told you it was transitory. It's like, you absolutely did not tell me this was what was going to happen in no way, shape or form. And just because this has kind of worked its way out, services in the flash, they do a flash estimate every month of how things are going. And the service sector right now is growing really well again, right? Well, that means it can afford the wage rises. That means the prices are going to keep going up. Yeah. And don't think for a minute that we have this giant problem with almost every problem I hear debated in society these days, where we have to be binary about the solution. It has to be transitory or it has to be secular. No, the mathematical correct econometric answer is there was a transitory element to that inflation. There's also a secular element to it following a pandemic, which follows the precedent of all pandemics we've ever had, right? The transitory element has calmed down in that equation. The secular element is still there. And it's very possible you can still create, for example, traditional wage price spirals if you don't get a handle on minimum wage. What I'm yet to see is an analysis, because I know that the civil service was significantly impacted this year by minimum wage because some of the poor bloody civil servants get paid so poorly. So when you put 10% on next year, what's that going to do to the civil service budget? I don't know yet, but we'll find out. And then you see them trying to give 5% to the doctors, and you think, it's just not congruent, is it? It's not congruent in any way, and I don't know how they can even attempt to justify it. But there's every chance of a little fire starting a bit. I'm not saying inflation's going back to 10 or anything like that, but we could easily see a dip and then a reversal of the trend, and we could hit 5% again. And then again, there'll be panic in the bond markets and all the rest of it. This is why I feel pretty good about where the yields are today in terms of, I'm on the soapbox again, I know, but fixing some debt. I don't think fixing for 5 years is a bad idea at this time at all. I think it's an excellent idea. And I think if things don't stack up at the sort of 3.6% yield level, then you've got to look at the mix of what you're holding. Because we could easily have a couple of years now where those interest rates stay pretty stable within a volatile range. 3.5, 3.6 for the 5 year is low in today's world. And we base at 5.25, not being funny, but it can't go a lot lower. You still had 6-3, 3 people voted upwards, 6 people voted to hold. You're not suddenly going to get a meeting in January where they go, or I think it's early Feb, the next MPC meeting, but they're not suddenly going to go, actually, I think we should cut rates by 0.25% or 0.5%. And people who think they are going to do that are wrong. They might cut rates by 2%, because there's been a massive economic meltdown that none of us have seen coming. I don't think it would happen in as short a time scale as that, right, to be clear. But they're not going to be cutting. They're not going to be cutting by little bits until later on in the year, until late Q2 or Q3. They're just not. Rant over for the moment until the next one, until the next round.
I find that very, very difficult to argue with, Adam. So, yeah.
That's where I like to position myself, Jake. We did say today, though, when we were talking before, didn't we, that we might find 5 minutes to talk about the Property Investor Awards from this year, because we did give that a shout out. I think we had Lizzie last year, didn't we, to talk about her experience as well. So maybe we should try and get someone on at some point. And Safe,
we should definitely do that. Yeah, Lizzie was newcomer and Safe won Trader of the Year, but new people took their crowns this year, and one person took 4 crowns.
Has anyone ever done that before?
No. 3 is the most that anyone has won in a single award year.
I was expecting to see some photos of Sam sort of going like this, or something like that. That would have been good.
Yes, Sam Patel took 2 of the HMO award categories and was the Investor of the Year. Do you know what? He won so many. I forgot which ones he actually won. Bless him. But yeah, that was cool. It was such a good night.
From what I saw of the judging process, that was well deserved. That was a easy decisions to make on the categories of his that I voted for, without a shadow of a doubt.
Well, we were on a panel together at the Property Investor Show a couple of months before the awards came out, and the people were asking us in the room, like, what was the best deal that you had you judged? And I was talking about the SAS Property Deal of the Year. Kate, I can't remember her, Spanier, I think it is.
Yes.
Who absolutely killed it. That deal was even now I'm still thinking I would do that deal. But obviously me and Helen did day 1 of the judging, and you did day 2, which was all the HMO awards, which are a huge category. But you didn't even take breath. You're like, this is the deal that I'll talk about, because it was and that was obviously his deal. And even when you were talking about it, I was like, Jesus, it's unbelievable. Like, there was some unbelievable, the structure, the way the deal was thought through, the way it was executed. When you see it done like that, you just think, wow, yeah, that's got to be award worthy, because they stand out so clearly like that. And there are some categories where it's not quite so clear. Yeah. For instance, Trader of the Year, there was 1 point between the winner and the runner-up. Obviously, the Trader of the Year isn't a big category. There is normally 2 or 3 applicants, right? But
what is there nowadays, like 40 or 50 judges or something like that? So 1 point. I mean, that is
exactly. That's really worth making clear for people at home. There was at least 24. Yeah, I think there was nearly 30 judges this year. So to come down to 1 point is honestly. Bear in mind,
we don't sit there with scorecards in the air for someone to tally up. We have no idea what the judge next to us has put down as. We'll have a chat about, that was interesting, blah blah blah. but you're not saying, okay, I'm giving that a 7 or I'm giving that a 10. It's so, and that's something that's really interesting about the process. And when you look at some of these deals, like for the SaaS deal of the year that I was looking at, I was sitting there thinking, well, the other person that did a deal was good. They're very well established. They've been doing SaaS for years, blah, 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 blah. But there was just something about this one SaaS deal that just kind of, it was so well done. And it was done by someone who just understood the rules so well, because there are quite a significant amount of rules for SaaS and SIPs.
Yeah.
And I just kind of thought, well, this person has to win, because that has to be the case study for people when they're looking at investing their SaaS, which is a really big undertaking. In my personal opinion, if you're going to be looking at doing something like that, then understanding how to structure a deal like this, because she took a loan back out over 5 years and paid it back in 9 months, which is just insane. Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep talking about that deal for a while. In the same way I spoke about the Savoy's deal, the one that they did where they basically got the unit at the rear for free and got it valued at £400,000. You see deals, and they definitely deserve winning that award. You see applications like that, and you see people winning awards like that. You think, okay, there's people doing some really good things. It kind of makes you think, well, we're doing really good things. How else do we do really good things like them? I mean, whether you apply for an award or not, but it's good to highlight the fact that this was the first year that Sam Patel had applied for the Property Investor Awards, and he walked away with 4 of them. And he's quite, he's not a big boisterous character. He's not really humble. He's kind of mid the road, he's very affable. He's a nice guy. But you wouldn't have known that he was going to walk away with 4 awards based on if you bumped into him on the street or at an event. He just talks about just doing good, solid work, pipelining, blah, all the good kind of common sense stuff you want to be hearing from people.
Yeah.
And then walks away with 4 awards. It's ridiculous. It's brilliant. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and that should just really encourage everybody else out there doing stuff. Like, I don't know if in Sam's mind he entered those awards thinking, I'm going to win this. Probably not. Most of the winners we speak to every year don't go in thinking, oh, I'm definitely going to get this. But just, talk about what you're doing and show us. And it's really lovely to see I hadn't heard of Sam before. So to hear a new name like that and see what someone's doing it was really encouraging for me.
I think Jay said before about the overall standard of all of the applications. It wasn't like, he's coming into a field where there were no other applications of quality. There were some fabulous, particularly the, I don't remember the specific name of the category, but the HMO conversion or maybe commercial conversion of the year or something like that. There were some super entrants in that ticked every box you could tick, and it really was a tough one to gauge, There was some super, and it's great to it brings new people, I think, into the broader church of people who will talk about it, people who might do articles for Property Investor News, people who might do, it effectively. And Jay's just said as much. We all learn something from the judging process. That which is a nice bonus for being a judge. And when you are open-minded, you can look and think, yeah, do you know what? That's pretty incredible way of doing that. And there's always, I was involved in a deal in the past week or so where someone had structured it in a certain way, and I thought, do you know what, I've never done a deal like that in that circumstance before. And then I just thought, how stupid I am, because how have I not seen that angle before? But isn't it nice to be able to pick those sorts of angles up and then think, well, how am I going to, it's one more in the toolbox that's just a nice little combination of a couple of different things. It's clever. It's clever.
And they're the things that, as you say, as judges, we really like to see, because we're like, oh, whoa, I never thought of it like that. And we definitely learned something new from the applicants, but also kind of from each other as well. It's such an enjoyable process. I just love being involved from the judging days and being with the judges and other kind of niche, experts in their own niche, to the evening. And we have to say well done to Cyril and to Sophie for just such a great evening. The food was great, the venue was great, the music was great, the host was great. Lizzie opened it.
Tell us a bit about hosting it, Helen. What is it like from start to finish?
Do you know, it's so fun. So I was there all afternoon because we have to go there and prep, check everything out, rehearse it, walk through. Obviously, it was me and Ranjan and coordinate kind of what we're doing there. But Sophie's amazing. Everything under control, everything very calm. I'll have to say the whole team very calm, very clever. There's a great kind of the audio visual team are fabulous with what they do. And it's just from the moment I get there, I'm giddy like a kid. I am so excited because literally, like, I don't know until those envelopes opened. I don't know. And I don't want to know because that would spoil it, and I like finding out when everybody else finds out. But no, it's so good, and seeing everybody coming in, again with that excitement, that buzz of will it be them? Obviously, we had 2 Property Sisters tables this year, a number of Property Sisters entries in some of the HMO categories. So I know they were all hopeful. And what I say to everybody, I went over to them afterwards and said, like, actually, especially in those HMO categories, as you know, Adam, just to be listed on that board as a finalist, because there were so many entries, especially this year, just to be listed as a finalist is a huge, huge achievement. It really is. It's not, everybody that enters gets to be listed as a finalist. It's not in those categories. So just that, that we've looked over them, they've been scored highly enough by us and all the other judges to get to that level really says something about what they're doing. So it's not just lip service. It's not like, oh, well, it's going to be fun. It's not. We actually mean it. It really is. It does say something about what you're doing. How did you enjoy it, Jay?
I had a great time. We obviously, myself and Piotr were on one of the Property Sister tables. Big up the Property Sisters. I got to sit next to Amy Rowlingson, which is always an absolute pleasure. She's a bit of a legend. So it was always good conversation, but it was a brilliant table. Someone thought it was intelligent to sit us next to Auction House London, which in hindsight was probably a mistake. Because I can't remember most
I've
of the
requested
evening.
that same spot for next year.
Anyone in particular from Auction House London you've got in mind, just out of interest, or just a general comment about auction, just out of interest?
Just throw a dart at a wall and you'll hit someone that will just. But it was a great night. It's a great bunch. It was kind of spearheaded by Andrew Binstock, and if you've never seen him auction or you've never met him in real life, you don't know actually how insane that can be, because he's a dynamo of like pure energy. So you kind of if you're walking around with a half glass of something or no glass of something in very short shift, there'll be a drink in your hand. So that was good fun. And then equally good for laying out the tables, they stuck them right next to Clive Empson. So it was so auctioneers sitting next to auctioneers. And I think they're quite friendly, but if it was another auctioneer, it could have ended up being a bit of an atmosphere. But the drinks kind of at the end, it was just a massive room. I don't think anyone ever thought of leaving, because you went from where you were dining to where the awards were being given to an equally large room where people were just drinking, and then there was a dance room that Piotr was kind of the king of for about 7 hours that evening. So yeah, personally, I really enjoy the event. So I think it's like my fifth year. Actually, I didn't do 1 year, or COVID. Not. I've done most of the years since 2018. I've been. So I really enjoy the event, and I really enjoy the judging. But yeah, I've kind of keep my space on the Property Sister table, because it's always a class group of people.
It is. We do have a great table, 2 tables. And we had Mike Bristow from Crowd Property. Obviously, it was just always just such a pleasure. He's such a good guy. You can talk sensible business with, and about VC stuff as well, not just property, because obviously he's involved in the VC space as well. But yeah, just funny, great guy. And him and Amy were talking about cricket and all sorts. It was, yeah, we had a lovely table. So thank you for everybody that was on our tables too.
Amazing. We got a couple of comments. One can I just bring out Guy's comment. He says, I suspect this must be the last show of the year. Indeed, it is the last show of the year. I want to take opportunity thanking you and viewers for Merry Christmas, wishing everyone Merry Christmas. And Guy says that he basically wakes up for this show in America. So I'm guessing that's like 4 a.m. or something like that. Must be a severe case of insomnia. But we do enjoy.
I think we'd send him back to sleep, wouldn't you, Piotr? But Guy, thank you for all your regular attendance and all of your comments, and also I've enjoyed the interactions we've had over the course of this year, and I hope there's some more next year as well. So thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
great comments.
Definitely.
Always a
And thanks for letting us off the next 2 weeks as well. That's ever so kind of you. So thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Well, we won't be here for the next 2 weeks. However, if you miss us, you can always go to these 2 channels. Well, didn't paste properly, but Property Auction Hunters, we're launching a new show on YouTube where we're going to be reviewing auction properties with Saif and Omar. So we're planning.
I look forward to seeing some of that. That'll be some great stuff.
Yeah, we already recorded a couple of episodes, so they'll be coming up weekly.
Who's playing David Dickinson, or is that not a role in the show? You need some kind of bargain hunt style character involved, surely.
I've got the tan.
I don't think there's enough. I don't think there's enough iodine dye to make me the Dickinson colour of orange.
Actually,
you need to get Donald Trump. You need to get Donald Trump. Helen's stand nowhere near good. Sorry, H.
Their show is
That'd be
actually
great.
going to be called Deal or No Deal, and we're going to be basically saying whether something's a deal or no deal. So look out for that, and also Adam's channel Proponomics with Adam Lawrence. I'm pretty sure you're going to be releasing some content, Adam.
I've been doing an advent calendar every day for those who haven't seen it. So a 60-second short, and then a 5 to 8 minute longer explainer of a few concepts. So it's 17 days in now. I haven't posted today's yet because I'll post that one tonight. But yeah, I've enjoyed doing it, and I'm looking at what more I might do in the new year. I've quite enjoyed doing what I've been doing with the channel. Chance to interact with some new and different people. Chance to reflect on how poor my tech skills, marketing skills, video editing skills, and everything else are. So at the moment, it's just been what it does for me, which I explain to people all the time. It just helps me organise my thoughts a little bit. And there will, for those who may show any element of concern, don't worry, there will still be a supplement on Christmas Eve and on New Year's Eve. Because as I said today, unless there's a nuclear event near South Birmingham, when there's Sunday, there's a supplement coming. So don't worry about that. But I wouldn't want to, I'm not particularly naturally organised person in any way, shape or form. So actually the structure that it gives me and the structure that it sort of implements up here, I find so incredibly helpful. It's like an exercise regime for my brain. And that's I commit to it as, someone who's pretty serious about exercise regimes would commit to anything really, it's been a real best thing for me to come out of the pandemic, I suppose I'd put it as. But that show sounds great. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of that, because that'll be good quality. Is that just going to be like regular slot every week or every month or whenever you can do one, or what's the drill?
Yeah, we're planning to do one a week on Monday, 7 p.m.
Cool.
premiere.
Super. Starting in the new year.
Now starting tomorrow.
Starting tomorrow, right? Cool.
Woohoo,
Better get the subscriptions into the channel now.
Yeah.
So that's it. In case we haven't said it, don't forget to subscribe, allow notifications, like and comment, and do all the other fun stuff that people tell you to do. But yeah, it should be good. We're looking forward to it. The first couple of recordings have gone really very well. At least we're excited by it. So
right.
Cool.
Yeah, we would watch it.
You would hope so.
Amazing. Okay, everyone. Well, wishing you all Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. See you all in January.
Happy Christmas.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Feliz
everybody.
Navidad.